Clash of Clans has changed dramatically over the years. Balance changes, new abilities, reworks. They've made the game way better, or maybe worse, depending on who you ask. But here's a question. What if there were no balance changes at all? What if Supercell never intervened? What if everything was still exactly the same as it was at the time of release? Well, today, we're gonna figure that out. But first, I need to make something crystal clear. We're about to create a virtual meta where everything remains exactly as it was when first added to the game. And then we'll dive into how this would affect the entire game, how it would completely destroy the most popular strategies we know today. And trust me, it gets wild. But even before we get into this chaos, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Come on, do it. It's free, starting with the basic troops like barbarians, archers, goblins, and minions. These guys had little to no balance changes throughout the years. And even if they did, it wouldn't really affect our virtual nightmare meta, so we're not gonna waste time on them. The Giant is hands down the most popular troop from the start all the way to Town Hall 7. It's also one of the original troops that were in the game when it first launched back in 2012. Here's the thing though, it received a ton of balance changes over the years, but here's where it gets interesting. Almost all of them were buffs, increasing its hit points and damage. Without those changes, the Giant would be significantly weaker than what we're used to today. And in our virtual meta, where modern defenses exist, but Giants still have their original 2012 stats? Yeah, that's gonna be a problem. We'll see just how big of a problem later. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't add wall breakers in with the common troops. Well, that's because when they were first released, they weren't common at all. They were completely abnormal, and not in a good way. When wall breakers first launched, their AI was absolutely broken. These guys would attack walls even if it was just a single piece, destroy that one piece, and then move on to the next random wall. It was chaos. This resulted in players creating special anti-wall breaker bases, with spikes of walls designed purely to distract wall breakers before they could reach the main walls. But that's not even the craziest part. Players were also using decorations to make wall breakers go in specific directions. It was so broken that Supercell actually made a video explaining what was happening and how they were fixing it. Lucky for us in our virtual meta, wall breakers are never fixed. We'll see exactly how this destroys every strategy we know. Balloons are another troop with minimal balance changes, but there's one thing that would completely change our meta. Originally, balloons did absolutely no damage when they died. Zero. Nothing. Just a sad balloon falling to the ground with no explosive finale. The wizard had some balance changes, but the most notable one would break our meta entirely. In the beginning, wizards had no splash damage whatsoever. Yeah, you heard that right. This guy is throwing fireballs, but they only hit one target at a time. A level 6 wizard was accessible at Town Hall 10, which was later moved to Town Hall 9. But honestly, without splash damage, would anyone even bother using wizards? Oh, and here's a fun detail. They used to make a completely different sound when they died, which I found pretty funny. Here's where things get really interesting. The healer used to be one of the absolute best troops in Clash of Clans, until Supercell nerfed it so hard that they literally killed an entire strategy in the process. But we'll talk about that later. The healer originally had 20 housing space when she was first released. Her AI was also completely different. Instead of sticking to a group of troops and healing them consistently, she would abandon them if they walked even slightly too far away. But here's the real kicker. Healers used to heal way more when they were in large groups. There was this incredible synergy where multiple healers would amplify each other's healing power. During an update, Supercell completely nerfed this ability, which killed one of the most popular strategies in the game. Lucky for us, that never happens in our meta, because balance changes don't exist. Moving on to dragons. These beasts have been OP since the very beginning. They're popular at Town Hall 7, 8, and 9, but at higher town halls, dragons are still being used effectively. Dragons got little to no balance changes, so they'd probably still dominate our virtual meta just like they do today. The P.E.K.K.A. received a lot of buffs over the years, increasing both hit points and damage, but there's one thing that would absolutely break our meta. Originally, P.E.K.K.A.s used to be affected by spring traps. Let that sink in for a moment. The strongest ground troop in the game, with 25 housing space, could be launched into oblivion by a simple spring trap. I have no idea what this would do to our virtual meta, but I guess we're about to find out. Oh, and here's a fun detail. P.E.K.K.A.s used to spin while they attacked. I know it sounds weird, but that's how they rolled back in 2012. The dragon had some minor balance changes that most people don't even notice. But there's one thing that would be different in our virtual meta. Whenever a hidden Tesla popped up, the baby dragon would immediately abandon its current target and start attacking the Tesla. This would make Tesla placement incredibly important for defending against baby dragon attacks. The miner was an absolute monster when it first launched. It had 5 housing space compared to the 4 it has today, 24 movement speed compared to the current 20, and here's the biggest thing. Defenses didn't retarget to other troops when the miner went underground. Why this was changed, I don't know, but I do know it nerfed the miner significantly, and I also know this nerf never happened in our meta. The implications are terrifying. The Electro Dragon was hated when it launched, and it would still be the most hated troop in our virtual meta. Some things never changes. The Yeti was completely out of control when it first launched. It was dealing 4x more damage to buildings and town halls, but there's something really odd about how Yeti mites spawned. When a Yeti took damage above 600 points, it would spawn a Yeti mite, but if the damage from a single hit was, let's say, 1800 damage, instead of spawning 3 Yetimites like you'd expect, it would only spawn 1. This was eventually fixed, but not in our meta. Also, the building damage was reduced by 50%, but again, not in our timeline. Dragon Riders used to have an attack range of 4.5 tiles, which was later reduced. Their hit points were also decreased, but then increased again at higher levels. In our meta, they'd still have that insane 4.5 tile range. Here's something surprising. The Electro Titan hasn't received any balance changes despite being the second strongest ground troop in the game. It remains exactly the same, which means it would fit perfectly into our unbalanced meta. The Root Rider is the second most hated troop in Clash of Clans, and for good reason. It had the health of a golem, massive damage output, and the most frustrating ability ever. It could pass through walls like they didn't exist, making wall investments feel completely useless. Their hit points were decreased in February, then their damage was reduced, then hit points again, and finally, their damage was reduced by 50%. Supercell nerfed this troop into the ground. But in our meta, none of that happened. Root Riders would still be the wall-ignoring nightmares they were on release. The Thrower, it's still pretty useless, and it would be even more useless in our original stats meta. Here's where things get absolutely wild. The Hog Rider was one of the most broken troops in Clash of Clans until Supercell did its thing, but there's a chance Hog Riders would be completely useless in our meta, and here's why. Hog Riders had no favorite target. They would attack everything. Walls, buildings, decorations, literally whatever was closest. This isn't just a balance change. This is a complete fundamental rework that would make Hog Riders completely different troops. Valkyrie was considered one of the worst troops in the beginning because she was missing her core abilities. She had no splash damage, couldn't effectively move between buildings, and was incredibly weak compared to what we know today. The 2016 update solved all these issues, giving her the splash damage and pathing improvements that made her viable, but that never happened in our timeline. The Golem did receive some balance changes over the years, but that's not what made it less popular. It was the Eagle Artillery that really hurt Golem strategies. In our meta, Golems would still have their original stats facing modern Eagle Artillery. It would be brutal. The Witch was an absolute beast when first released, because her abilities were completely overpowered. Her attack range was 5 tiles compared to the 3 tiles we have today. But here's the game-breaking part. Her skeletons used to trigger traps. This is incredibly significant, because skeletons triggering traps is something that fundamentally changed how the Witch worked. In our meta, Witch attacks would clear entire trap fields. The Lava Hound was completely broken on the defensive side when it first launched. It used to deal damage to both ground and air troops when it died. Its death damage radius was 5 tiles compared to the current 3.5, and it could completely ruin your entire attack if you weren't positioned perfectly. In our meta, Lavaloon would be even more devastating than it already is. The Bowler used to require 8 housing space, and wasn't very popular until it received some buffs. The housing space was decreased to 6, and it became temporarily overpowered before being balanced again. In our meta, Bowlers would still take 8 housing space, making them incredibly expensive to use in attacks. The Ice Golem was way too overpowered on the defensive side when it launched. It froze troops for much longer durations, and could completely destroy your attack if not played carefully. Eventually, its freeze radius was decreased, and the freeze duration on defense was also reduced. But not in our meta. Ice Golems would still be the freeze monsters they were on release. Headhunter, Apprentice Warden, and Furnace didn't receive any significant balance changes, so they'd remain the same. But the Druid? That's a different story. The Druid wasn't necessarily overpowered, but it received a massive nerf in October 2024. At all levels, its healing was reduced by 50%, and the evolution time was decreased by 5 seconds. They might as well have removed it from the game. In our meta, druids would still have their original healing power, making them support troops. So far, we've established the troop situation in our virtual meta, and it's already looking like complete chaos. Now that we've talked about all the troops, let's see how they would actually affect the game. For that purpose, we're going to pick some of the most overpowered and completely dead strategies, along with current ones. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll realize just how much chaos we've created in our virtual meta. Let's talk about wall breakers. You know those little guys that are practically used in every ground attack up to certain town halls? Well, here's the thing. They would cease to exist in our virtual meta, and here's why. Their AI is so dumb, so incredibly broken, that they'd be practically unusable. Think about it. Before the AI update, people were making anti-wall breaker bases left and right, but when Supercell upgraded their AI, those bases disappeared because wall breakers actually became smart. But that never happened in our meta. People would still be making those brutal anti-wall breaker bases, which would be absolutely devastating at lower town halls. Now, at higher town halls, this might not be as big of a deal because of air strategies from TH8 to TH12. But here's where it gets really interesting. Wall breakers used to attack every single wall they saw, even if it was just a random spike wall. They had zero intelligence. This would completely destroy classic strategies or change them beyond recognition. Strategies like Go Wipe and Go YY, which rely heavily on wall breakers, would never use them. As a substitute, they could use earthquake spells, but that does no good because you can only have one spell in your clan castle. If you take 3 more earthquakes with you to destroy walls, you'd have to drop a heal or rage spell, and that's not good for anyone. This would completely disrupt the meta, because literally no one would be using wall breakers. Now healers, here's where things get absolutely wild. Healer is one of the best troops in our meta, with one exception. It has 20 housing space, but here's the kicker. They heal more when they're in a group. Also, on the defensive side, healers would actually heal buildings if they were in the clan castle. Because they heal more when they're grouped up, Super Queen would still be a thing. This was a strategy mainly killed by nerfs, but in our virtual meta, that never happened. In this strategy, players would use tons of healers with some troops for funneling. You might be thinking, okay, so Queen Walk and other healer strategies would be incredibly powerful, and you'd be right to think that, but that's not the case. Because in our meta, the healer AI was never fixed. The healer would abandon the troop they were healing if it moved just a little too far. In Queen Walks, this wouldn't affect much because the Queen moves slowly, but armies like Bowler Healer, Giant Healer, and Warden Walk would either not exist or be completely different and rely on heal spells instead. Despite being incredibly strong, healers just wouldn't stick to the troops they should be healing. We've just started discussing our meta, and it's already become a complete mess. The things that make P.E.K.K.A. strong are their massive HP, devastating damage, and the fact that they can't be affected by spring traps. At least, that was changed in the real game. But in our meta, that never happened. P.E.K.K.A.s are still getting launched by spring traps, and that is an absolute disaster. Just imagine your 8 P.E.K.K.A.s flying through the air while you're attacking. This would completely break the game as we know it, because you're not going to bring a 25 housing space troop with a 45-minute training time that costs elixir just to watch it get flung away by a spring trap. Mass P.E.K.K.A. wouldn't exist, and it would destroy some of the most broken strategies like Go Wipe. Worse than that, it would destroy the entire troop. What's the point of all that damage if she's just going to fly away? She'd become a complete joke. The miner never got nerfed in our meta. Its movement speed is still 24 instead of 20. But here's the most interesting part. In main game, defenses used to keep attacking the miner even when it went underground. Since they couldn't do any damage, Supercell changed it so that whenever a miner goes underground, defenses retarget to another troop. This nerfed the miner in the real game. But that never happened in our meta, and mass miners still exist here. Now that miners are dodging everything, it would absolutely destroy the meta from TH10 to TH12 because everybody would be using mass miners with heal spells or combining them with other strategies. It would be a complete no-skill meta. 3 stars would skyrocket. Walls would be crying in the corner. Hog Rider's favorite target isn't defenses anymore because that change never happened. They attack everything. Because of that, classic strategies like Go Hobo or Go Ho wouldn't exist. Instead, you'd have these wall-jumping troops that deal massive damage to anything. Mass Hog Riders would be a thing in this meta, paired with other troops. And without any nerfs, Hog Riders would have significantly higher HP and damage. Walls are crying in the corner again. What have we done? The Valkyrie would be the worst troop in our meta, and here's why. She doesn't have any splash damage. She doesn't move between buildings to attack. She got no buffs. This is mainly because these improvements never happened in our meta, making Valkyrie the most useless troop ever. They'd only be used as filler troops. This would also completely wipe out mass Valk attacks. Anti-Valk bases wouldn't exist at all. At least the walls are happy about something. The Witch, without any nerfs, would be absolutely game-breaking in our meta. Their attack radius would be 5 tiles instead of 3. Skeletons would have more HP, and most important of all, skeletons would be triggering traps. These were the things that made Witch overpowered in the first place. Strategies like Go Wipe and Go YY wouldn't die out like they did after the nerfs. She'd be one of the most powerful troops in our meta. But without the buffs, the Witch would have 50 to 70% less HP and damage, which is kind of a compromise, but that doesn't change the fact that she'd be absolutely game-changing. Bowler would still have 8 housing space, which means people wouldn't use it. The most common strategy at the time was healer and bowler, but since healers are a little dumb in our meta, that strategy wouldn't exist either. The bowlers would never get their moment of glory, and without any buffs, the bowler would be pretty weak. Now that we've completely destroyed our meta, let's see what happens to the strategies. Right off the bat, OG strategies like Go Wipe wouldn't exist because of the P.E.K.K.A issue. Remember, in our meta, the P.E.K.K.A is still affected by spring traps. You can't even use wall breakers because, well, they're completely brain dead. Go YY wouldn't be affected as much and would survive longer because witches were never nerfed. Again, there's a substitute needed for wall breakers. Maybe the Queen at TH8. This strategy was the replacement for Go Wipe in the main meta, but in our meta, Go Wipe is gone. That's why Go YY would be absolutely massive. Root Rider Valk would never exist because, well, Valks aren't popular in our meta. Sad. The Goho strategy, which contains golems and hog riders, wouldn't exist either because hog riders attack everything in our meta since they have no favorite target. Strategies from TH2 to TH7, which heavily rely on wall breakers, would also struggle significantly. Now, I know I might have missed some things because of the absolute mess we've made. We haven't even talked about spells and building balance changes or heroes. We'll definitely need a part 2 of our virtual meta exploration. But if you're still here, what attack strategies do you think would exist in our virtual meta? Comment down below. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We put a lot of effort into making these videos, so just leave a like. I'll see you in the next one.